this week, Vietnam's boat people, they escaped from their country to Hong Kong. Now Britain has done a deal to send them back.
It is possible that to implement mandatory repatriation will necessarily involve the use of force, and that it would cause considerable human tragedy, radicalization in the detention centers, and so on.
But without repatriation, the message will not get back to Vietnam. Like they come to Hong Kong, they're facing a screening policy, and which once they screen out, they will be returned to Vietnam. So this is the message we're trying to get to Vietnam, and so less people will come.
But they come in their thousands in search of a better life, and they come as victims of their country's troubled history. Hong Kong has continued to provide first asylum to all those who complete the dangerous journey across the South China Sea. No one has been turned away. But the problem for Hong Kong in the late 1980s is that resettlement in third countries has not been keeping pace with the numbers coming in to its already overcrowded territory. How the influx has been swelling in the past 5 years is dramatically clear from the figures. In 1985, just over 1,000 boat people arrived in Hong Kong. In 1989, the total up to Monday of this week is over 34,000. Pressure of numbers has led Hong Kong to apply strict rules as to who is a genuine refugee and who is not. Those who are, like the people in this camp, can stay until some country agrees to resettle them. But it can be a long stay. 1 in 4 have been in camps for more than 3 years, 1 in 6 for more than 7. This man arrived from Vietnam with his family in July '88. A building worker by trade, he'd been forced to work as an agricultural labourer for 9 years. That was his sentence for having tried to escape by boat in '79. The second time he made it.
On the whole, life in the camp is all right, but it's definitely better than our life in Vietnam. It was very miserable living where we were. In the jungle, we had to walk miles and miles before we reached the market. Then we could not buy the necessary food even if we had money. We could not travel because we were under surveillance. Leaving the zone was very difficult.
Where do you hope to be resettled?
I would like to be resettled anywhere, except a communist country.
But for 40,000 out of 57,000 boat people, being deported to a communist country, their own, is what's likely to happen. It was from Phoenix House on Tuesday that the first plane load was sent back. Throughout Hong Kong's detention centres, the fear of a similar fate has since led to what seems like fruitless protest. These days, most of the boat people have come here to escape not from persecution, but from poverty. If the applicant fails and is screened out, he has a right of appeal to the Refugee Status Review Board, whose chairman, Francis Blackwell, is a former Hong Kong judge. He's well aware that desperate people very often tell him desperate lies.
If you lived in a country like Vietnam, where I think it must be accepted, economic conditions are dreadful, and it's quite clear that there's a great degree of pressure put on people by communist officials. And if you'd fled from that, and if you anticipated punishment just because you fled, and for no other reason, quite apart from the fact that you might have reasons as well, good reasons for fleeing, you'd say anything and you'd do anything, wouldn't you, not to be sent back? I would.
But few appeals are upheld, and now those who are screened out will be sent back to the country they escaped from. Hanoi, capital city of Vietnam. and much further from Hong Kong in political terms than the geographical miles that separate them. There is no way that any program of repatriation of boat people can work unless the Socialist Republic of Vietnam wants it to work. And Vietnam has been saying that anyone forced to return cannot be accepted, but that those who choose to come back are welcome. But welcome to what? To what kind of society? To a country that won a war but has yet to win an economically stable peace. To a country whose political organization is still the unchallenged preserve of the Communist Party, through neighborhood committees that watch and report on the behavior of their fellow citizens. And for those who would reject the legacy of the late Ho Chi Minh, the penalties can be harsh. But Vietnam's foreign minister maintains that boat people who did escape to Hong Kong, and thus committed a crime, will not suffer for it if they return.
There is no harassment, no. We would like to encourage them to come back.
You want them to come back?
Yes, to encourage them to come back by voluntary and not forced repatriation. You know.
Those who have come back voluntarily are being monitored by the UN High Commission for Refugees. The results so far, according to the man in charge of the program, are encouraging.
I would say they've been treated quite fairly according to the Memorandum of Understanding signed in December last year between the Vietnamese government and UNHCR. That memorandum was very clear that these people would not be prosecuted nor discriminated in any way because of the fact that they had left illegally the country. According to the Penal Code of Vietnam, there is punishment provided in those cases. And we negotiated with the government a written agreement that they would not be prosecuted, and they are not.
A handful of HCR officers like this man have the task of keeping in touch with 637 returnees. Successful repatriation depends not just on official amnesty, but on living conditions, money, acceptance by the local community.
Xin chào. Xin chào. Chào anh. Chào cháu. Chào cháu.
The family who live in this tiny house came back from Hong Kong in October. They went away to escape from poverty, but soon realized they would never be resettled as refugees. The husband works as a cycle taxi man. The wife sells tea from a street stall. They've come back to poverty.
Life will be very difficult. We have made an application to the Ministry of War Invalids, Labour and Social Affairs to get financial assistance to repair our house so that we can live in it. That's the situation now.
How have other people accepted you back? Has there been any resentment at all because you went away?
The neighbours talk to me. They are very good and kind.
And has there been any problem with officialdom, with the authorities?
With the authorities? No, nothing in particular.
So far, this officer hasn't found evidence of political discrimination against returnees.
No, I haven't actually. The difficulties I have seen are due to being jobless.
The returnees are not finding a job?
Yeah, exactly. In one case, a returnee from 1987 hadn't so far found a job. But we must remember, in the bigger cities like Hanoi and especially Ho Chi Minh City, the unemployment rate is around 30 to 35%.
And most of those who have a job in the city or the countryside can't hope to live on what they earn. Average per capita income is equivalent to £70 a year. Most people's monthly pay packet lasts for little more than a week. Nearly everyone we met has a second job. Teachers who take in washing and do dressmaking. A retired army general's wife who, we were told, sells cigarettes on the street. 14 years after military victory, Vietnam is an economic disaster. Bac Mai is the country's biggest hospital. Built by the colonial French, it was heavily damaged by American bombing at Christmas 1972. It's a place that cries out against the inhumanity of power politics. Since Vietnam is denied Western aid, partly because of the war and partly because it invaded Cambodia, the hospital lacks drugs, equipment, decent sanitation. It's a teaching hospital where, for lack of equipment, they often can't practice what they teach.
Cho nên là tôi nghĩ rằng là nếu như là cái sự hiểu biết.
I think that if our friends in the West understand our country better, then their aid will certainly be greater, and our work, treatment of patients, scientific research, and training doctors will improve.
Đào tạo cán bộ của chúng tôi tốt hơn.
If the West is to understand the country better, then it should take note of what's been happening on the streets in the past year or so. A Vietnamese version of Russian perestroika is at work here. They call it Doi Moi, and it shows itself in the sights and sounds of street enterprise. It's only in the past 12 months that most of these traders have been allowed to operate, dealing in a range of offerings from foodstuffs to clothes and household goods to music cassettes and jewellery. The street markets are lively, colourful, optimistic places that can offer opportunity to at least some returning boat people. This young man came back from Hong Kong in August. He had fled the country to get away from a poorly paid job. Doi Moi is much to his liking.
In 1982, I started training as a craftsman. During that time, I had to work 8 hours every day. We were not allowed to set up our own private business. We had no money and we were unsettled. Now I've returned to Vietnam and live with my in-laws. I'm helping my wife and my sister-in-law in the family shop.
Do you think you've done the right thing in coming back?
Now I've returned and live here with my family, I think my decision was right. I have no regrets.
There is little sign yet of political transformation along Eastern European lines, but at top party level there is a strong desire for economic cooperation with the West.
Here we have a very cheap labor force, we have very cheap raw materials. So if combined with the capital from foreign countries and technology from foreign countries and management, we can have product of high quality. This is profitable for foreigners and for my country. It is the only way to develop my country.
This factory in Hanoi makes one of the most necessary products for everyday Vietnamese life: bicycles. Most of the equipment is ancient, much of it installed by the French over 30 years ago. Methods of management and marketing, however, are new in the past year. Selling direct to the customer, trimming the workforce by 20%, and offering incentive payments. Surely the aid for investment that a factory like this needs would have figured in the bargaining with Britain overtaking the boat people. But the foreign minister says no.
I think we could not bargain money with violation of human rights. We could not deal with.
So there is no question, as far as Vietnam is concerned, of any deal with Britain that could lead to forcible repatriation?
No.
But you say that you are opposed to forced repatriation, but doesn't mandatory repatriation, which is what Britain and Hong Kong are talking about, amount to the same thing?
You see, English language for me is a foreign language. And English language is well known as very ambiguous. And I have no Oxford dictionary on my pocket, so I could not make a difference between mandatory or forced repatriation. What is it the difference is?
Well, as I understand it, mandatory repatriation means that someone is told that they must go.
There is a forced repatriation.
And therefore you wouldn't accept it?
No, we could not accept. To punish only the people who are living illegally. But once they return, we must have a clemency policy. Even we must handle them.
But you hope that the hardcore, as you call them, can be persuaded if things work out well for the quiet majority?
This is my hope. Sometimes we dream, sometimes good dream, and sometimes bad dream, you know.
What this man told us, he came back on a voluntary repatriation flight 2 weeks ago, suggests that bad dreams are more likely. He told us of the life he left back in a Hong Kong detention centre, among those who had gone there, as he did himself, after the new screening laws were introduced in June '88.
All the refugees like me who arrived in Hong Kong after the 16th of June are considered as illegal immigrants and haven't been granted refugee status. Sometimes they even beat us, including the women and children.
What do you think the future is going to be like for the people in the detention centre where you were in the next few weeks and months as they worry about possibly being sent back by force?
I think they're panicking and they're afraid of compulsory repatriation.
And it is just as likely that many will try to concoct stories to persuade the review board that they are genuine refugees who can stay.
I'm quite certain that the board can expect even more lies than it's hearing at the moment. Of course, we are inundated with lies every day. We're inundated with sad stories. But that doesn't mean they're refugees. We don't let our hearts rule our heads too much. We have to be sensible about it.
But you are sensitive and indeed sympathetic, perhaps, to people's motives in lying.
If you saw the arguments and agonising that takes place when the boards meet to consider the reviews, you'd know how sensitive we are. I've seen my men in tears sometimes.
Those who are sent back will have some financial protection, though no one can be sure how $620 a head will be divided up between the Vietnam authorities and the people themselves. But another form of protection is vital. The UNHCR say they will not monitor forced repatriation. Britain talks of using charitable agencies, but the UN agency is stretched to deal with only 600 in its voluntary programme.
We cannot visit every returnee more than maybe once a quarter or something.
So when Britain or anyone else talks about monitoring forced repatriation in terms of the numbers that might be involved there, you won't do the job. Could anybody do the job effectively?
No, not without having a lot of staff monitoring. If you talk about thousands and thousands of people, no one can do that job, no.
So 40,000 Vietnamese are to be sent back to an uncertain fate. And if forced repatriation doesn't work, there is even talk of closing Hong Kong as a port of first asylum. But in the long term, only a vigorous aid program can make their own country a worthwhile place to stay. In the short term, the new sailing season will surely mean more sad human cargo on the South China Sea.